Today, we're diving into a pretty provocative idea. What if a country's greatest leap forward was actually the beginning of its downfall? We're taking a look at Brazil's lost future and how a deep wound from the 19th century might just be healed by 21st century tech. So let's start with a question that kind of messes with our basic ideas about progress. We're always taught that history is this straight line, always moving ahead. But what if, for one nation, that so-called progress was actually a step right off a cliff?
And the country we're going to put under the microscope for this is Brazil. The source we're looking at argues that the 1889 coup that got rid of its monarchy, well, it wasn't the dawn of some great new age. It was a painful break, a rupture, a wound that you could argue the country is still dealing with. So to really get this, we got to ask ourselves, what exactly was lost in that moment?
All right, to really get a grip on this argument, we need to hop in a time machine. Let's go back to the final decades of the Brazilian Empire under its last ruler, the philosopher king himself, Dom Pedro II. So under Dom Pedro II's reign, which lasted nearly 50 years, Brazil saw this remarkable period of stability. The emperor himself, he was a unifying symbol, someone who stood above the day-to-day squabbles of politics. In that position, it allowed for some serious long-term planning, which in turn earned the country a lot of international respect. Dom Pedro was a well-known intellectual, and this is crucial, his era oversaw the systematic, state-led end of slavery, a really delicate process in a huge and divided nation. Okay, so that's the picture of the world that was lost. Then comes the military coup of 1889. It promised a new, modern republic, but the reality, according to our source, was, well, something very, very different.
And the difference? It was night and day. That unifying symbol of the monarchy was gone, replaced by infighting and the rule of powerful coffee oligarchs, basically wealthy elites whose own interests came way before the nation's. Long-term planning got tossed out for these frantic short-term election cycles. National unity started to crack, and Brazil's standing in the world was replaced by a century of just chronic instability.
And this wasn't just a one-and-done thing. The Republic kicked off this vicious cycle. You go from the fraud of the old Republic to dictatorships to military coups. For almost 100 years, that promise of stable, democratic progress just never seemed to arrive. And here's the really tragic part. At the end of it all, Dom Pedro II actually had the military support to fight back against the coup. He could have started a civil war, but he chose exile to save his country from bloodshed. After a lifetime of service, he was banished, betrayed, and his reported last words were simply, "I love Brazil." Just a gut-wrenching end to an era.
But here's where it gets even deeper. The source argues this wasn't just about politics. To really truly understand what was lost, we have to look at the cultural and organizational DNA that the empire had inherited and was building on.
Okay, this part is absolutely fascinating. Way before the empire, Jesuit missionaries created something called Mihenga II. And it wasn't just a language, it was basically a piece of social technology. By creating a common tongue, a lingua franca, out of all these different indigenous dialects, they built a platform for unity, for education, and for stable communities. It was a perfect example of that long-term, human-first kind of planning.
And that kind of organizational genius didn't just pop up out of nowhere. The source traces it all the way back to the Knights Templar in Portugal, where they were known as the Order of Christ. These guys pioneered banking and credit, but, and this is the key part, they did it by creating a tolerant, multicultural society that brought together the best minds and skills. This mix of financial innovation and cultural connection was basically the engine of the Age of Discovery.
All right, so we've looked at the stable past, we've looked at the chaotic break. Now we're going to pivot to a really modern proposal, one that wants to use technology to bring back that lost spirit of connection, not just for Brazil, but for the entire world.
And the moral compass for this whole new project, it really comes from the imperial family itself. When Dom Pedro's daughter, Princess Isabel, signed the law that finally abolished slavery, the slave owners demanded financial compensation. Her response, reportedly, was this powerful, absolute rejection. Have they not abused the labor of these slaves long enough? That just shows you the deep moral conviction that was driving their actions.
And here is the direct connection, the line from then to now. The author behind this modern proposal, who's a member of the Chinese diaspora in Brazil, was actually educated at a school founded by an Italian order that Princess Isabel herself had invited to the country. It's like a personal bridge from the monarchy's last big act of nation building straight to a vision for the future.
So, what is this project?
It's called Romantina, and it's an AI-powered linguistic bridge. The strategy is just brilliant in its simplicity. Step 1 is the foundation. You leverage the massive data pools of English and Chinese to build a super powerful AI core. Then, step 2 is integration. You use that core to unify the 1.2 billion speakers of the Romance languages. We're talking Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italian. And finally, step 3 is expansion. Once you have that huge, culturally linked network, it gets way easier to integrate every other language on Earth.
And the sheer scale of this vision, it's just immense. This isn't some niche translation app. We're talking about a project that aims to connect two of the world's largest cultural and linguistic spheres, creating a network that right away covers nearly half of all humanity.
Then the proposal suggests this brilliant strategic move. It targets the BRICS economic bloc. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. By adding another R for the Romance sphere, it creates BRICS. With that one move, you'd instantly elevate the entire Romance-speaking world, and Brazil would be the natural bridge between South America, Europe, Africa, and all the other member nations.
But the end goal here isn't just about translation. It's about this incredible idea the author calls communicative sovereignty. Just imagine a world where you no longer need a single dominant language like English for global business or diplomacy. A world where a Brazilian can negotiate in Portuguese with a Chinese counterpart who's speaking Mandarin, and both of them are on an equal footing. That's a real game changer.
And what I find truly amazing about this proposal is its philosophy. This isn't some startup trying to get venture capital. It's imagined as a zero-profit, open-platform gift to humanity, an expression of what the source calls calor humano, that unique Brazilian human warmth, basically turned into code and offered to the world.
And this is just perfect. It brings the entire story full circle. The proposed symbol for this new era is the same one that sailed on the Portuguese ships, the Cross of the Order of Christ. But now, it's been reimagined for a new mission. The red stands for courage, the white for connection, all of it on a field of green for Brazil's vitality. It's about turning a legacy of discovery into a new mission of global connection.
Which leaves us with this one final, really powerful question. Can an ambitious piece of technology, one that's inspired by a deep reading of history, actually help heal a nation's century-old wound? And in doing that, could it offer a new model of global connection for all of us? It's a profound thought to end on,